for practitioners like us, there's always this kind of question as to where should we try to get attention. Is it, we know that the problems are really felt and defined on the ground in the factories, with the managers, but sometimes even, you got to go in, even further in the ground in the factories, talk to the workers, try to understand what they're struggling with. But on the other hand, to proliferate things, to get attention and to make momentum, a lot of times it feels like you have to go ping the brands and retailers. And there is this kind of power dynamic where they dictate what needs to happen, even if they don't have a clear idea of what's going on the ground, but they might be able to kind of put force behind it. So it's this kind of interesting balancing act. I know we talked earlier about your factory improvement tool set in trying to get back to work during the pandemic. How much of that, how did that balance this? How much of that was informed by on the ground but proliferated by actors further up the supply chain, or was it all really just very factory focused?
We have the two things. We've got the resilience guides and we've got the tool set. The resilience guides were really based on my experience and some other people we work with, external experts, and what we see as what are the key points for factories. What do they really need to consider? We didn't spend a whole lot of time going out to factories because I think we'd had access to knowledge on where the pressure points were and what was needed. The tool set has been a process. It's been a long process of talking to factories, talking to employers' organizations. That was in process well before the pandemic. It's been cooking around in my mind for at least a dozen years since I left a program called the Factory Improvement Program. Factory Improvement Program that I started a dozen years ago, and it continues very big in the ILO now, FIP. But it was based on a model which was all centered on experts going into factories, providing advisory support along a standard set of different areas, linking together good business practices and good labor practices and good environmental practices, the triple bottom line, trying to get factories to see that these things are all interlinked. I really believe it. I think that program, now called SCORE, is really hitting the nail on the head. Things are all interlinked. Good management, good labor practices, good environmental practices go hand in hand. A well-run factory looks at all of those. It optimizes for its resources, and people are a primary one in a high labor factory. People are it. So
certainly GBL is bought in, especially if you only have to extend the horizon just a little bit to know that if I don't take care of them, the pandemic has made it maybe ever more kind of evident than before that, if I don't take care of my workers, they're not going to be workers, even a month or 2 months down the road. So there is no factory. So it kind of brings it all front and center.
Yep. And getting management to recognize that and realize that this is really in my best interest. I think it's really tough to push something that is not in somebody's best interest. And the point I always made under the Factory Improvement Program was the great thing of this program is we're pushing something that's true. Good labor practices, good business practices, they go hand in hand. You want to treat your people well. You want to have good communication. You want to have a healthy and safe working environment. It just doesn't make any sense to have it any other way, but many factories don't. So our role has been to try to figure out ways to get those people that manage those kinds of organizations to realize that I'm losing money. And that's an easy sell if you can get it across.
Yeah.
But the challenge with any of these programs is cost and scalability. And that's what we started to develop with FIT. When finally the Swedish government was kind enough to give us some money to try to tackle this, and donor money is really, really crucial. You talk about working in different sectors. I've worked in the garment sector for ages, but we needed somebody. And the Swedes were good enough to come along and help us and provide an opportunity to say, okay, how about if we just develop tools that factories can use themselves? Not needing an expert, not needing you or me to go into that factory and tell them, hey, do A, B, C, clean that up, move that, label that, whatever it happens to be, but provides them the simple step-by-step tools for how they should run their factory in their own best interest in a responsible way. And so that was happening before the pandemic. As it would happen, it slowed us down, and we're only now getting the process of getting that started in Bangladesh and Cambodia. Also going to be going to Ethiopia and Pakistan with the SCORE program as it was.
That's great. That's great. I mean, I think that also hits on something you and I have talked about before. Also, this kind of idea that, you know, we were doing the work that we were doing well before the pandemic hit. There's always been these kind of long-term trends and issues. A lot of them being around inequality. A lot of them kind of knowing that you know, all shoulders in this industry are not bearing the same amount of weight. That, you know, or in any industry like this in the developing world, that the supply chain is kind of imbalanced in who it puts the most pressure on, whether it's the factories versus buyers, whether it's even within factories. You know, in garments, we know there's so many of these kind of young women who are the lifeblood of the industry and face a whole bunch of kind of personal pressures that others don't. And so it has this unique challenge of saying, well, how do I take care of these most impacted, vulnerable kinds of workers, knowing that they are the future of the industry? The pandemic kind of, you know, just it exacerbated that in a lot of ways, but it interacts with these pre-existing kind of issues. How do you see that playing out? Do you think that in some ways the pandemic will just widen these gaps and exacerbate this inequality, or do you see actually an opportunity for coming out of the pandemic, a rebalancing, or kind of leaning into the idea that, hey, we can change things and we can set up a new way of working as we get back to work that might address these preconditions as well?
Well, it's hard to guess. If there's anything this year has told us, we can't predict anything.
That's absolutely right.
If I had to lay my money, I think there will be a marginal impact of the pandemic longer term. It did highlight for a lot of people in the UN, a lot of people in development generally, that this was an unfair kind of game to some degree, that a lot of the risk rested on the shoulders of those least able to bear it. And maybe there'll be some adjustments that come of that, some kind of, maybe even some unity between different countries, because you mentioned there's things that go in within factories, you know, but it actually is between countries as well. You've got these pressures of we can be cheaper, we can, you don't want problems with labor unions, you won't have them in our country. We don't allow, I don't want to point fingers. There's other people that can do that. And there is, I think, coming out of this, maybe some unity between these different countries that will push some of the pressure back to the buyers and brands that are in some ways better suited to being able to deal with it, encouraging them to of having a unified set of standards that they operate under, because anybody that's been in a garment factory that's supplying 5 different major brands will tell you, on Monday I have one guy coming in with one set of standards, on Tuesday I got another one, Wednesday I got another one. I've heard there's some discussions along those lines of saying, enough of that. To what degree do any of these have to do with COVID and the pandemic? It's hard to tease that out, because there's processes that are underway, pressures that have been going. And yet, I think in some ways, I would like to see the glass half full of the pandemic, that maybe it will drive certain good practices. It gave the world a bit of a breather. It made us all look a little bit in our closet and see what the heck is going on in some of these supply chains and other things. So maybe there'll be something along those lines. But it's hard for me to say that, hard to separate it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that myself, that, we've been doing so much of this work beforehand. That work got hard. Sometimes, you got a little bit of attention, and maybe, there's certainly some funds that flowed. And so then you start to realize, well, maybe there's some attention on some issues that were existing before. And it wasn't as if the pandemic, kind of created them. But maybe there'll be some more attention on these issues, and we might be able to kind of leverage that to get some work done that needed to be done even beforehand. But it's really hard to say. the pandemic has certainly lasted longer than anyone could have expected, and so that's on the one hand continued to bring attention here, but on the other hand, people are going back to business as usual, and they're and it's hard to know whether you'll get much of an opportunity or anything will change per se.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There's a lot of back to business, and a desire, of course, by everybody to get back to business. It would be nice if it was back to a better business, from business to business prime, the one where we have better relations, we have better health and safety, we have some of these things. And I think maybe there are some aspects that were driven by this, but I think a lot of it is going to be going back, just getting those factories back up and running, those supply chains operating. And meanwhile, I've seen that some really positive initiatives that were taking place, organizations that have really been hit hard by this in terms of their ability to operate, including the ILO. I mean, we've been unable to operate our monitoring programs that we're doing in various countries. It's all having to go virtual to whatever degree we can continue to ensure certain practices are moving forward. That's the glass half empty side of things. So hard to say.